We're ready to roll. Hope you're all doing well.
Okay, I can see it now. Yeah.
All right, there we are. Welcome. Good evening, and we are live. Thank you all for tuning in. Tonight we have a little special feature for you. It's a sensory special feature, a discipline and a field of expertise that is very close to my heart. And I'm super glad and thankful that we have Franca Comparetto with us tonight, an expert on all things sensory and in particular cigar sensory. Franca, the founder and owner of Cigar Sense, thank you so much for being part of the Light 'em Up family, and thanks for tuning in. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Reinhard, for the invitation. It's an honor for me to be here. Hi, everyone.
As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box over here on Zoom or raise your hand. I'm checking all the live streams on Facebook, so put your comments just underneath the live video, and I'll definitely make sure that we forward them to Franca right away. Franca, let me ask you this as a first question. What would be your earliest sensory memory when you go back in time, probably to your childhood days? What is that one particular, probably your earliest childhood memory that still sticks with you?
Oh, that's a nice question. Thank you. I would say, I remember I love to walk around yards, our own yard or other, my parents' friends' yards, and I was always among the flowers. And I was starting to discover some flowers. But if we fast forward a little bit, I was, I think, 7, 8, and I started to have, and I realize now, of course, I didn't realize at that time, but now when I think back of, in June, school ended, and I started my holiday. I did have homeworks to do, but my mother was sitting in the kitchen, standing in the kitchen and cooking, peperonata, for instance, which is something I love. Or I remember some picnics with my parents where there was some beef meat grilled with oregano and garlic in the right balance. These type of things come first. If I have to think back in my life, those are probably the ones that come faster to mind.
That sounds just about right. I mean, give us a little background story, because you mentioned these particular Italian flavors and aromas there. You are in the United States now, right? But give us a little of the background story from Franca Comparetto.
Franca, right? Not Cigar Sense, Franca. Okay, I was born in Italy, and from a simple family where emigration DNA was very present, by the way, and I still carry it very strongly. And I grew up in the north of Italy, and I feel very blessed that my parents could afford paying my studies. My first studies were in languages. So English is my third language, actually. And immediately after that, I went abroad. And I started, to work. My first little job was a Italian teacher at the Berlitz School of Languages in Amsterdam. I was teaching Dutch business people Italian with the direct method for which Berlitz is famous. And then I had a more steady job in finance, etc. And there I started to also prepare my further studies. So I worked in Holland, then I worked always for the same financial institution, to simplify, in France, in Germany, back to Italy, Milan, and then to Belgium. I worked at the European Commission. That was fun. And there I finished my studies in economy, marketing, actually more consumer behavior. And then I started my adventure with Cisco. Cisco that brought me from Belgium to Italy and then moved me to headquarters in San Jose, California. That's why I ended up in the US in the first place. And now I stay because I married a Californian man, David Wells, who is partner in the Cigar Sense adventure.
At what point in your career did you first discover that love and appreciation for handmade premium cigars?
So that was, I remember it was 2003. At that time I was member and volunteer for Slow Food. I don't know how many of you know Slow Food. It's now an international organization. So I already like to go to tastings to get to know wines, beers, oils, teas, spices, you know, all these type of things. And after a nice low food dinner, a friend offered me Romeo Julieta Churchill. And I think that that is the event that made me fall in love with cigars, because the friend was not really somebody who could walk me through everything, of course. But I had already decided I'm going to learn as much as I can. And I can, I actually found a club soon after that, Puro Motivo in Torino, which is still my club in my home country. And then I was patient. I was waiting that they would start the first class in Torino for what they call catadores. It's classes organized by the Cigar Club Association of Italy. And I joined the course, and you know, that's then how I started to wanting to learn, because as you start to learn more, then you want to learn more and more, right? It never ends. Yeah, and I'm still learning so much.
Definitely. How often do you go back to Italy, actually? Because you mentioned you still have the club there, and since I know Italian people are very proud and fond of their homeland, like how often do you go there?
How often?
Yeah.
I used to go before COVID. So yeah, I used to go for a while. I used to go 3-4 times a year. Last year it was a little bit less, actually. And this year I haven't been yet. Since I didn't travel at all, actually, since after Christmas. Last Christmas I spent that in Italy with my family and friends. And then early January we moved back, and I never traveled again, other than, you know, just driving somewhere.
Yeah. Now, I think this is just such an interesting journey that you had, from that more entrepreneurial, or let's say classical business background, then venturing into something you were curious and passionate about, but you ultimately turned it into a profession and a calling as well. When did you first sort of start thinking about this is actually something that we could turn into a business? Or when did you even start to have the ambition of being part of the cigar industry?
Yeah, that's a tough question. So let me explain to you what triggered actually the idea of Cigar Sense. There were a couple of things, but I think the most important one is a very frustrating trial and error process that I have gone through when I moved from Italy to the US, and I wanted to find new cigars that I would like, that my palate would like. But I was used to Cuban cigars, and I had a big trouble starting to find the non-Cuban cigars that I would like. And now I have many, but you know, taste takes a while to change and to adjust. You know that very well. So that was the first thing. And of course, that situation brought me to start to build some data. I needed to find a process through which I would go to the tobacconists, and rather than trying to speak the language, the cigar language, I knew English at that time anyway, but it was the cigar language that somehow got lost in translation when I was trying to talk to tobacconists in the US. And so I figured I better don't try to talk the sensory language. I better try to talk the language of, I liked this cigar, I didn't like this one. With all the details that I had in my data, and I could show them, hey, this is why, you know. So this is actually what preceded the idea of Cigar Sense. And then what really started the project was an idea of David, actually. One evening I was relaxing with him in the hot tub, and he told me, could you create a cigar genome? I said, what? Scaring, you know, who could ever think to be able to create a cigar genome? And I understood where he came from. He loves Pandora. I don't know if you guys know Pandora or you use it. It's a music, personalized music service online. And actually they created the music genome, which means they hired a team of musicologists and they analyzed every track, every music track in the minor details. And they built a use database, and that's how they recommend music to people. And so after I understood what was happening there, then, you know, okay, we discussed about, okay, but what would be the objective? You know, what would we target to do? And so, yeah, we decided to start a plan. And yeah, today we describe cigars over 150 attributes, and every now and then we add some. And yeah, that's a big database that we started to build back then. It took us a year to go live because you need to have some data to go live. And so we worked actually with a sensory science consultant, a PhD from Davis, and we built the process. We built everything, and the panel is the precious resource that we have here as well.
Could you possibly go into a little more detail and describe that process of setting up the initial product as such with that sensory consultant?
The sensory, not the service, but the back-end process of analyzing.
Exactly, like the basis at the very beginning for which you also worked with the sensory consultant you just managed.
Sure. So we started hiring some and of course they were not trained panelists at that time. We're currently training them. We started the training program later. But yeah, you need to test more than one sample, of course. So you need to have more people from start. And after having created the data structure, then we started actually in Excel, the back and forth of files with the panelists, with all the information we needed. We tested, and we still test blind. And today I consolidate blind as well, because, you know, if you are the person who has a company on the phone, you don't want to be influenced by that relationship, right? So I don't want to look. I look at the data after I upload it in the system, and oh, that was it. Okay, well, data is data, you know, it is what it is. That's what Reinhard also says of your panel. Data is data. Yeah. And you know, and then we grew the panel, always paying attention to spread the different panelists across region. And we can talk more about why the panel trained on sensory analysis, because there's a lot of whys there as well that if you like, we could talk about, and if you find it interesting.
I can imagine that's really the case. And yeah, absolutely. Like, let's dive right into it and give us, yeah, a bit of an overview. How many panelists do you have now? How do you work with them? And then let's focus on what you just described, and that is how far you spread your panel. I guess you have people from all walks of life, but especially from all different regions around the world, because I'm pretty sure that there is some cultural changes in palate perception and the way we go about sensory analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. You're totally right. You know this stuff very well. I know that. So we currently have, say, 12 very active panelists. More that, you know, one important thing for me is that I don't want to force people to do something. They have to like doing it, right? And if they don't, I sense it, and then I just don't ship samples for a moment until they tell me, hey, I haven't heard from you for a while. Oh, okay, so you're ready again. All right. So, but say active, let's say 12. And I think that's a good number also because we test 10 samples in general for each vitola. So, you know, there's a way to play with that. That's great. And I actually, at the beginning, I had no network when I started here. I had zero network, zero relationships. So, you know, I went to my Italian buddies, the schoolmates, and I asked them to join my panel. And of course, they wanted to help. So that's how we started. And you could say the regional spread was not very good at that time. But in fact, we also keep retesting some cigars, you know, over time. So that saves us, right? So, and they were, of course, people who had at least the same class as I did, you know, catadores. They knew how to evaluate a cigar. They have been smoking cigars for a while. And then I started to find some equivalent people, at least who knew what it was to evaluate a cigar. And then I started to also say, hey, it is not so important to be able to judge. I don't like judging the cigars, right? We need to focus on the description. That's also part of the sensory analysis method. We need to focus on the description. It's true that you have different parts of the analysis, and one of the final parts is evaluate the properties based on the individual properties that you have sensed and described. That includes somewhat a level of judgment, of course, subjective judgment for each. But overall, you know, I didn't want to see in the comments, so I liked it, I didn't like it, right? And let me also say, actually, the comments are important to me, but we never publish the individual comments of the panelists. Just like what happens with Cigar Journal. You publish the highlights, that is the result, the consolidated results of all the findings, but you don't put comments of, Reinhard wrote this, and you know, that's not the point of the panel, right? Otherwise, you don't have a panel. You have individual subjective judges. So you know, now the experience in evaluating cigars and judging cigars is much less important to me than the certain other skills, and one of them is being open-minded. It's not because, so we have some limitations when we do blind testing. The visual aspect might be distorted a bit, right? Because we do see the cigars. We have to evaluate the visual, the appearance as well. But that is a cause for bias. You know, if I like a Connecticut wrap cigars, I am more likely to give a better evaluation of a cigar. If I don't like it, you know, I have those. I started not to test myself anymore unless I have a lot of same size, same type of color cigars that I reband, and then I know I have a bad memory, so you know, then I do it. Otherwise, I know I know what I rebranded, so I can't test, and I can't be affected. That would be another bias. If I reband, it wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't make sense to smoke blind, right? So there's a lot of areas where we are influenced when we do our work. We need to just be aware of that and find the right way to tackle that through the method. It's amazing because when I consolidate data, I can see clearly, and that's beautiful. It moves me when I see that 3, 4 more even panelists have even the same aroma. Level 2 aroma, the detailed level of the aroma, the outside part of the wheel, in the same position of the same tertio with the same level of intensity. That's the best we can get from any region in the world.
Franca, before we go into a little more of the sensory details, just walk us very briefly through the process now. When you take on board a new panelist, obviously you mentioned it's not just somebody who has been smoking cigars for all of his life and then be like, I like it or I don't like it, because there's a difference, and I'm not always sure that people are clearly making that differentiation between an experienced smoker and an experienced taster or panelist. So when you bring on board somebody, how does that transition process look like in order to bring the new panelist up to the format or the way you conduct those tasting that you would like to have with Cigar Sense?
Yeah, so the onboarding includes, of course, knowledge of the system, of what the purpose is. You need to know what the purpose of what you're doing is. So the first thing that seems to me logical is you have to know Cigar Sense, what it does, well, who it serves, right? Second thing is we have a theoretical introduction to the sensory analysis and how we apply the principles for our tasting. So there are guidelines. There are some do's and don'ts, but that's part of the game. And then we do have some little shipments of little vials that we send to, because calibration is an important aspect. So a panel needs to offer 3 big things: calibration, it needs to be reproducible. Sorry, how do you say that in English in the adjective form? Yeah, and it needs to be reliable, right? So what we publish needs, the consumer who reads our analysis needs to be able to find back those aromas that we call out, those tastes that we call out. That's what I call needs to be reliable, and you need to offer a reproducible experience. Of course, there's a lot of things that people smoke on top of the cigar, but when people really smoke the cigar, that is what I expect. So we have little vials to make exercises. Vials that, we prepared with the sensory expert as well. And it was fun because they are based on a liquid solution that is obtained from the distillation of pieces of cigar. And to that we add, some essence. It could be essential oil if it's a natural substance. It could be synthetic lab created if it's like leather, for instance, or chocolate or so.
So you pretty much take a distillate of a cigar and then you just amplify one particular high note in order to be able to disassemble the individual characteristics. Here's chocolate, here's coffee, here's leather.
Yeah. And what is cedar to you must be cedar to me.
Franca,
or we get it all wrong.
That's a very interesting point here, because you know, quite often we talk about everybody has a different scent memory, everybody has a different sort of sensory database. Because if you tell me a particular whiskey, for example, smells like heather honey, yet I've never seen or smelled heather honey in my life, it will be difficult to have that particular scent memory. So how do you go about that?
So yeah, and you said it completely right, because there are different things here. So, and that's what the sensory sciences try to address. There is this so-called experiential gap, which is what you described, okay? So this means that to the same stimulus, I respond in a way that can be totally different from yours. That's human. That's human. That's why, you know, sensory sciences focus on the human beings. They also have, of course, laboratory machines, of course, but the interesting part here is in the human behavior, the human response to a stimulus. So you need to have the genetical, first of all, set up to be able to recognize the stimulus. And then you have your brain that needs to connect from one side to the other, because the sensory experience is in one side of the brain, the language. So the way we interpret the sensation and needs to find a name, ideally a common shared name in the industry, is in the other part of the brain. So the two don't connect by default. We need to train them. So that is one important thing for which we need to train ourselves. The other thing, and that is for a panel, but also for an individual expert taster like you are. Like, I guess there may be other people listening who are sommelier, for instance. They know, yeah, I am expressing my subjectivity, but I'm trying to recognize this and that. And that's one very important thing. The other part that we're addressing actually more through the panel is that we are all human beings, and therefore we have a lot of biases everywhere. Biases have genetical, cultural, psychological origin. You find biases anywhere. We're not even aware we have biases. I've been having a bias for coffee for some months. And then I was starting to see that too often in the data. At that time, I was still having to test the cigars myself. It was in the past. And so, it's not true. It can't be true. I have coffee in almost every cigar I smoke. It's not possible. And in the moment in which you realize yourself or somebody tells you, then you start to focus on that, and then you can correct it. But otherwise, we have there are, well, let's leave aside the genetical type of biases. I mean, people don't have an equal amount of receptors and sensitivity in an equal way. We are all different there to start with. Two, cultural, that's extremely important. I mean, there are people in the US, for instance, many people, when I talk about animal aromas, they look at me like, well, you know, they have an aversion. Mm-hmm. And then you look into the details and you are, okay, all right, yeah. And, you know, we're smoking young cigars, and those are very frequent, right, in the cigars that we smoke. And, or there, you know, these aversions may also have an origin. And I'm not confusing aversion with biases, but what I mean by this is that when we have an aversion, we often are not positively set up to evaluate something. So we can think about cheeses, for instance, you know, from when we are children. If we grow that association, it can be negative for certain times, especially for the older cheeses. You know, that's a difficult thing. We can have, there's the so-called sour bitter confusion. which is another interesting thing. It's cultural. There are people that confuse bitter and sour, and they're more frequent than you think. David had that, and he corrected it thanks to the work we're doing, actually. And that means that, you know, even the labeling of products may be incorrect, like bitter lemon. Bitter lemon has sourness. It's sour, but they call it bitter, you know, these type of things. And maybe because I'm Italian, or in Europe, we're more used to drink some bitter aperitif drinks or digestive drinks, and maybe that's why less of us might have that confusion, but it is very frequent, however, among people.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly why before we were talking about, you know, having people on the panel from all ends of the world in order to sort of, you know, dilute such cultural or regional biases and individualities, right?
Yeah.
Franca, let's just maybe for those people who are listening who are less into the whole sensory analysis and sensory evaluation, to make it a little more digestible and easily approachable. When you get a cigar, how does the process of you or one of your panelists sampling that cigar look like?
I think it's the usual. So the act of smoking a cigar does not require any particular, you know, different way of handling the cigar. We analyze, you know, we do the raw analysis, meaning we observe it, of course, before we start to cut and light it. We do focus a lot more on the lit cigar analysis by tercio, and we have a lot of descriptors that we use there. And you can imagine just by looking at our aroma wheel. Then, as I was saying before, we have the evaluation of the overall quality based on the previous evaluation of the individual properties and how it all fits together. Because
let me phrase it differently. What are some of these individual qualities that you're actually going through when sampling the cigar?
Oh, it's sorry, I give for granted a lot of things. So it can be complexity, evolution, balance, persistence. Those are probably the most common if you hear about them. Yeah, so there's definitely an evaluation of that. And then there are the other typical types of evaluation of the burn, and of the ashes, you know, the usual evaluations. What changes is the type of the way we enter the data, the way we consolidate the data, and the training of the panelists, I would say. Otherwise, you know, if you just look at our analysis form, it's not really a big deal. It's not really that sophisticated or that more different from what is used by Cigar Journal. I'm part of the Cigar Journal panel, so that's why I can talk about this. It's not really that much more sophisticated. You know, it's not a big deal. You know, it's not like, oh, we all have to use the Puisa method. We light the cigars before we cut it, because it's nothing like that.
Yeah, true. Like, I mean, you mentioned biases and misconceptions before, and I think one of the most frequent misconceptions when it comes to cigar analysis or evaluation is in particular regarding the strength and intensity or the body of a cigar. You know, we throw around all these wordings very, very freely and openly without very carefully and attentively focusing on what they actually mean, right? Because some people might say this is a full-bodied cigar. Somebody else might say it's a strong cigar, right? It could be an intense cigar. Where do you draw the differentiating lines here?
So first of all, if I may say, we have banned the term body from our website. You might laugh about it. I don't want to offend anyone, but that's when I started to realize how many meanings the term body can have for different people. And we can't afford to recommend cigars to people based on the term body. So the term body can be, you know, the aroma intensity, the tactile perception intensity, the taste intensity, the persistence, the smoke density. It can be so many things for different people. And maybe that, you know, for you and for Cigar Journal, it means something clear. And that's great because you have a common language. Now, because we work online, we need to avoid any source for misinterpretation or confusion, because there's a new member coming in, doesn't know what we mean with body. And besides all, we have all sorts of members of all types of experiences. So you can't really, you know, and it's difficult enough. I know when it comes to language, when I talk about complexity, maybe it doesn't mean anything to somebody, but, you know, at least we try to be able to explain every term in one way.
Give us an example, especially regarding complexity, which I think is very important to a lot of cigar smokers, because like, especially when you smoke a lot, nobody likes a boring cigar. What does complexity mean in the world of cigar sense?
Excuse me. Excuse me. I just got a moment to drink. So complexity is an horizontal dimension that takes into account the proportion, the quality, the variety of the aromas. So when looking at the way we represent the sensory aspects of the cigar through our charts, some people told us, oh, okay, so I see a lot of sections filled in, so there's a lot of aromas in this cigar, must be a complex cigar. That is not necessarily true all the time, because one thing is the quantity of the aromas, one other thing is the intensity of those aromas, the other thing is seeing that in conjunction with other elements, like what constitutes, I call it spine. The nicotine strength, the tastes, the tactile perceptions are the most important factors that make the spine. So the aromas need to be in balance, like every master blender aims at doing, with the rest of the sensations. And so that is complexity to us. It's not just the quantity and the intensity of the aromas that we find. There could be some aromas that can be elusive. They can be dusty, they can be not clean. So, you know, there's a lot of things that then create this final complexity idea. Does that match your interpretation of complexity?
It's a very interesting point to bring in the element sort of quality of the aroma and not just the quantity of different aromas that you have in there, right? And I think that's the key part here. Franca, I would love to bring some of the questions to your attention, because we've got so many people watching over on Facebook, and Jose Blanco was watching, so we're honored to have the professor joining us over on Facebook. Thank you, Jose, for tuning in. Franca, he was asking, do all of your panelists retrohale?
That's an assumption, of course. Now, let's be clear, I'm not the one telling them you have to retrohale at every puff or a minimum number of puffs. I I do see when I consolidate the data, right, to what extent certain aromas have been identified or not. And then, but yeah, overall, yes. And by the way, there are ways to perceive the aromas from within your mouth and stimulate the receptors in a way that doesn't really force you to exhale through the nose.
Right.
So, they are free to use whatever they judge necessary to identify that. And they're very clear in terms of the objectives of the analysis. So, yeah, I would be surprised if a panelist would tell me today, hey, I've never been retrohaling. I would be like shocked.
That's a good point. And then Lawrence was asking, are the calibration kits that you use available to buy? I guess he'd like to do some testing himself.
That's a complex thing. First of all, I've been trying to hand them over when I would meet them at some trade shows or so, rather than shipping them, because already shipping them might be a problem. Mm-hmm. It can be tough. No, I mean, selling that would mean changing some business models, which we have not considered at this point. But it's interesting because I've been asked this question more frequently. So, maybe there might be some change. So, but thanks for the interest. Yeah, they're very interesting.
We also had a question from Ray, our big supporter, our all-time here, every day, every lounge. Ray, the man, the myth, the legend. Welcome. Please raise your question.
Hi everyone. Yeah, thanks Reinhard for that. Yeah, it's not because I don't have social life, but obviously it's not stuff to do at the moment. That's why I'm really pleasant to be on that kind of shows and talk with all the interesting people. Even today, I'm so enjoying that session. It's very interesting for me. It's not only talking about the few stuff and not explaining anything or anything. It's just a lot of details, which most of them I didn't know. I have myself for experienced guy, but obviously I'm not that experienced as some of the people here. But my question was, how many cigars approximately per year you do a blind test on it?
Ooh, per year.
Or per month? Well, it's even per month. We will.
We're probably around the 100 per month, not more. We actually had we augmented a database quite fast at the start. But since we have applied sensory analysis norms more and more, it takes longer to get 10 samples, takes money too, when we don't get them from producers. So that's, it's not like we're augmenting the database at full speed. We do have members that ask cigars that we don't have in our database yet, and those cigars have the priority, of course. Else, with the COVID, we stopped everything basically. We didn't ship anything anymore. I've lost some packages in the past with prior to COVID already anyway. So,
and
that's the answer.
Yeah, thanks for that. One more question, Reinhard. Did you
as many as you like, brother?
Thank you. Did you do tests only on the new release cigars, or also some vintage one or old one, or even let's say someone will make a test on, let's say, all vintage 20 years old cigars? Did you do that as well?
So let me say, we do not support we're not fast enough to respond to newly released cigars. We're not focusing on the new releases necessarily. If it's an ongoing production and we find good to add to the database, we do. Maybe the manufacturer wants to send us samples, and that's great. We do add them. We do not deal with vintage cigars neither, because that's a different type of work. Even our aroma wheel does not include the aromas that are supposed to be there for vintage cigars. There are some special aromas that you need to take into account there. The vintage cigars are a totally different market. People know where to go. They don't need Cigar Sense to be recommended what other vintage cigars they could try. They just go by the procurement source that they know or they're looking for.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question.
Frank, a follow-up question on what Ray was mentioning. Whenever you bring in a new cigar, would all of your panelists have to try that particular cigar and multiple sticks of that, or could it also be just a fraction of the panel?
Yeah. As I said, we have more panelists than the samples that we normally test for every Vitola. Right. So, yeah.
Great. And since you mentioned consumers and their different expectations or the different experience levels, would you say that Cigar Sense probably caters more to less experienced smokers or people who are curious to learn and you want to bring them into the world of handmade premium cigars? I mean, I guess you have all sorts of subscribers and people in your ecosystem, but would they probably get the most value out of it?
So, in fact, I realized I didn't explain what Cigar Sense does. We started to talk about the details of the analysis process, but can I say just briefly what Cigar Sense does, what it offers? And then I can tell you, what type of consumers are members. So Cigar Sense is an online platform that helps cigar lovers find the best cigars that suit their personal tastes. I would say preferences, because preferences are not just sensory preferences for us. So taste sometimes is misleading. And we do that by using an inference engine that learns each member's individual tastes. And through the interaction with the matching system, then we match every cigar to every member, and we rank the cigars for the members, for the consumers, based on how highly they fit to their palate. And we have a 90% plus satisfaction rate from members. And there is a free membership, by the way. It's not all paid, so feel free to go and play with it, and then you let me know. Because we have been growing with a constant rate, we have many consumer preference, in a lot of consumer preference data information, in which manufacturers start to be interested, because we have a lot of adjacent markets like wine, beer, chocolate, honey, whatever, where the listening, understanding of consumer preferences is a very widely method used to help companies not fail new launches, new product launches, or optimize the portfolio, or even just address some, marketing communications, set up their marketing mix. So Davido says we are like working with a mega focus group. In fact, and you all know what a focus group is, I guess, but it's subject to influences from the moderators or from the consumers who talk to each other in the same room, right? And they can influence each other. So in fact, in the case of Cigar Sense, it's cheaper and more reliable because consumers don't talk to each other, and they have the inherent reason for telling us the truth, because the reward is they get better recommendations. The more feedback, honest feedback they give us, the better recommendations they get. So, and then we do some educational activities like virtual seminars, or we have the podcast.
Of course.
Yeah, so that's what Cigar Sense does. The consumers that come to us, they are of all levels of experience. So there are people who are just starting, and they tell me, my tobacconist advised me to smoke a flavored cigar, but I would like to try, the natural ones. Can you help me? And yes, of course. And there are people who tell me I've been smoking cigars for 30 years, but I didn't focus on the cigar itself. I was focusing on many other. So there are consumers who smoke a lot of things, right? Which are not the cigar. And that's great. That's great. They're happy. They need to be happy like that. But the ones that really find flavor as very important among the criteria for them to choose a new cigar are the ones that come to Cigar Sense. We ran a survey at the inception of the service a long time back, and there were about 80% plus people who told us flavor is one of the most important factors for me. At Cigar Sense, those people are 99.9%, of course. 0.1% being just the ones that want to challenge the service. So, that's the type of people that we work with. That's our little tribe.
How important would you say are these other aspects, like the podcast, like the seminars that you do? So all that sort of, things around the core product. Would you say they play a much more important role now, and is it evolving, or is it just an extra tool for you to sort of keep in touch with the community and exchange some ideas?
Yeah, thank you. That's a nice question. So I started the podcast because I still write every now and then, but I used to write articles mainly on the website. And English is my third language. So every time I wrote an article, David had to review it as a minimum, and it ended up not being my article anymore. I was not expressing myself. Now with the podcast, it's me. Whatever comes out is me. I may correct some mistakes sometimes, but it's a way to express myself in a different way. In fact, we don't monetize the podcast. We just do it. We don't release very regularly neither. But I do it because I like to that way to express myself. The seminars, that's a bigger exercise. There's more work related to that. So that's why we don't do them very regularly, but we will repeat it because it was very successful. People are really looking for education. Yes.
That's a wonderful point. And actually something that I just wanted to follow up with. Do you in general think that we need to improve sensory education and knowledge?
Yeah. That's a big question. Of course, if you ask me, I tell you, of course, yes. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of people. So consumers in general, their decision-making process is primarily based on, I like it, I don't like it. Right? And often they don't want to know. They get bored when we start talking about the sensory aspects of the cigar, and that's great, and they don't have to do it. But when I hear people approaching me and wanting to find what are the cigars that best suit them through the service, and they tell me, yeah, listen, I don't have a problem. I can smell food. I can smell drinks. It's just with cigar, and these cigars are complex products. I need to learn how to do it. And those are, I love them because that proves that there's a segment of consumers that definitely is looking for that type of education. Now, I didn't do service. I cannot give you percentages, but, I think consumers in general are becoming smarter and smarter. I mean, the more information they have at their availability, the more they know, the more they want to know. And knowledge increases the passion. And the more we know, the more we have pleasure through cigars, the more we buy what gives the cigars that give us pleasure. It's good for everyone, right? It's good for the consumers and it's good for the businesses.
It's an amazing point that you make in here. And I like the fact that you mentioned, like for some people, it's, do I like the cigar, or I probably don't like it. And that's ultimately all that matters, right? Because it should be a pleasurable experience and we don't have to overcomplicate everything. But the more we know, as you perfectly stated, the more curious we probably get. And I feel with every question that we can answer, we just discover even more questions, and we want to dig deeper. And
Yeah.
I mean, some of the industry legends like Jose Blanco and Carlito Fuente and Nestor Plasencia and all these folks that were on the show as well, they all mentioned, we keep learning every single day. And
Yeah.
that is fantastic.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I don't know that there is somebody who can say, no, I know it all. There's so many aspects as well, and that's also why with Cigar Sense, I kind of, I point to articles on Cigar Journal that talk about how to light cut a cigar, because you can't cover everything, every areas of the knowledge on cigars. Master blenders will give you their view, which is already a very wide and very deep view. Retailers will give you their view, and everybody has a different, we just need to put it together.
I think it's a fine line also. And I was curious, how can we, and especially you with Cigar Sense as well, offer a learning experience without being too pushy or overly schoolmasterly?
Without being too pushy, meaning you have to do this, you don't have to do that.
Yes, and like with schoolmasterly, I mean, like, giving other people that study the impression of, well, we know everything better anyways, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, they're not my tribe, those people anyway, But maybe I can, I'm not sure if this answers your question, but there's one big learning we had with Cigar Sense through, since we exist. We did a survey in order to understand how to build the user experience. Does it need to be for people who are knowledgeable? Does it need to be for starters? Now, and that's also a very nice Dunning-Kruger example here, but we believed it. We really trusted the answers, right? But most of the people in the survey considered themselves as knowledgeable, expert. There's a lot of these. In the industry, there's even a lot of competition among consumers on the knowledge, I notice. But we did take it for granted. And we built a user experience that was not very useful to the real consumers that really had the interest in approaching a service like Cigar Sense. Because what we did was, okay, so now you're knowledgeable, so you must know, well, we didn't say it that way, but you should then know what aromas, what tastes you like. And we asked them to plot them into the charts, and that made their initial profile. Now, guess what? It wasn't right. It wasn't working. They weren't happy because they thought, like David, I was talking about the bitter and sour, confusion. Like David obstinating himself, that was very funny, to not accept the profile advisor that was telling him, accept a little bit of bitterness in your cigars. You won't be unhappy. And he obstinate, no, I hate bitter. His favorite cocktail is Manhattan. Now, and he kept saying, I hate bitter. So, it did. So of course it didn't work for him. It didn't work for these people who thought they knew what they liked. So we changed dramatically the user experience. And we made it like, okay, start by telling us some cigars that you liked. And then we infer your profile. And then we recommend you some new other cigars that you will like based on that. And then you take it from there. And that works so much better. Because, yeah, these biases are not things we're aware of.
Great point when speaking about the user or customer experience in general. I'm pretty sure you changed quite a few customer experiences and customer journeys for the cigar industry, right? When you're working with companies like Davidoff. What could some of those perception shifts look like when you work with a cigar company, a manufacturer, or a brand owner, in order to help them bring their experience to another level?
So unfortunately, there's not enough time that elapsed since we started to offer that service to make some really conclusions in study cases. But we definitely help build in the marketing mix, because when we can tell some people, okay, in this region, this works better than in this other region, and we can connect. So there are a lot of people in the industry that work based on demographics, right? And so they want to see the data broken down not only by region and what might work better in terms of the sensory properties in general, but also, okay, how can we get, some more information about these people so we can reach them better. So that's a first example. But we had questions like, so why didn't this cigar sell? Mm-hmm. Okay, so of course, if you work with us, you need to set the marketing and sales effort aside for a moment, because what we do is not something that can allow you to compare, the success of sales. So on one hand, you need to keep doing, based on past sales data, your statistics, but then you can have an insight on, okay, so if you think that you've done everything as you usually do with marketing and sales, now these are interesting points, right? So this cigar presents these and these, and in that region where you were trying to push it, this works a little bit less. So, there's a lot of data and we just, we need to make some sense of it. And so the best for us is to respond to specific questions. However, what we do is also we save people money by running the samples with our panel and then with our consumers. So when you launch a new product, you first have a small group of closer people test it, and then you have consumers, maybe with the help of a distributor in a country or so, you have consumers test the cigar as well. You have already invested at that point, pretty much, because you've chosen the blend, right? But we can actually make people save money by doing faster and in a cheaper way the same, just based on the data, without actually having to ship out or distribute cigars or so. And we can do it, of course, with the expert panel and then with the consumers.
Marvin, you had a question. Welcome to the show. Always great to see you.
Hi, guys. So glad to see that you fixed the electricity problem, Reinhard.
Yes, I have to say though, I was without light and electricity for 2.5 hours. Everything was dead, but it was sort of the entire block here. It was crazy.
That's a first in Vienna, right? You're based in Vienna.
Yes, that's true. It was quite weird, but I'm super happy the show kept running and people were still online when I tuned back in. So I'm truly glad that you guys keep the show running anyways.
Good to see that happen. Franca, hi. I'm sorry I missed the beginning of your session, but I have a question. I mean, don't you think these reviews that like 88, 91, like what's the difference between 88 and 91, for heaven's sake? And all the cigars are 88 and above. What happened to 75, to 52? I've tried cigars that I could go through the first 3 puffs and I throw it away. And then I look at the reviews, 88. Like, seriously, guys? So don't you think that these ratings, I can see Ray laughing. Don't you think that these reviews and rating are like way, way off, and in some form they influence badly the consumer, or maybe the brands are relying more on these ratings just to sell based on advertising money that they put with that? And so magazine, excuse me, Reinhard, for that question, but just
amazing. I love the question. Bloody hell,
what do you
please.
think?
Are you asking Reinhard first? Because this
I'm
part
asking both of you, actually.
Okay. Okay, okay, let me go. We don't score cigars for that reason. Because we do different. So I don't know if you looked at the analysis we published, they're very schematic. They are aiming at eliminating as much as possible the subjectivity of the panelists and give you the data that is really what we believe is the data that is of value to advise consumers. And if consumers can read a lot of interesting reviews from bloggers, from, and Cigar Journal has a panel. They do score cigars, but they give also very succinct, summarized version of the sensory, experience of the cigar as well. And I think that for the same reason. And then there are the consumers who smoke the poetry of the reviewer. And of course, there's a lot of influence. And there's a lot of reasons for which consumers go to certain sources or to others. What we try to do with consumers is, well, first of all, our service is consumer-centric. So anything that you might call review that you see published from our website is for consumer use in the first place. For me, responsibility was an important thing in creating the service in the way it is. I never published a personal review of a cigar myself. I never did that because I always thought, who am I to try and change other people's taste based on my review? My taste is my taste. But then if I work with the panel, if I train the panel in the way I explained earlier, that's a different story. But there are consumers that find the Robert Parker of the cigar and they find sympathy with that Robert Parker, and then they would buy any cigar that that person would blog about, would say. So, the problem is that what I think ultimately ends up being all of these subjective individual reviews is that the consumer gets confused. The consumer who is looking for information to make a buying decision and not just reading poetry or other things, they will never find, so these consumers will never find matching information if they do a cross check. That is what happened to me when at the beginning, I explained how I arrived in the US and I went through this trial and error process to find the non-Cuban cigars that I could, that could fit my palate in the US. And I was reading reviews and I get headaches every time. Because nothing matched. So, I start to like how somebody writes a review, but then I read another one that says totally different things. So that didn't work for me. So, and that's also why we don't do that in that way at Cigar Sense. Hopefully I answered.
Thank you. Now I'm playing host. Your turn, Reinhard.
Well, I think reviews and judgments on based on points are always a delicate matter, because people have mixed opinions about that, and some might say we're the leading authority and every word that we say is like written in stone, and every panel can have slight issues here or there are not being considered totally complete. For me personally, I have tremendous respect for every single cigar that I get to smoke. So when I write my personal review, first of all, I know that the aromatic descriptives that I use will probably not be to everybody's liking, or probably they can't perceive the very same nuance, but that doesn't really matter. I, first of all, look at the cigar with the utmost respect, as I told you, and I'm also using as much of the bandwidth as possible when doing a review. And I love the point that you mentioned, we're always fiddling around with the 88s and the 89s, and then probably a 90 shows up or something. If I like a cigar, why not give it a 95, 96? And if I do not like it, or I think it's not up to the quality standard that I was expecting before, well, then give it a low score, right? But I think that's also partly due to playing safe a little bit. It's like if you ask people to do a poll, most people will be like around 8, or maybe giving a 3 if they really don't like something, because we're always afraid to give it a high or a low score because something great might come along, and then where's your cap? And you really do not want to give a very bad rating to something you don't like. So without being able to give you like the exact answer you were probably looking for me, it's first of all about the respect. Then using the scale that you have available in terms of points. And as Franca mentioned, there's different purposes for different reviews, right? Some might be more lyrical and entertaining, and others might be a little more critical or trying to give people a buying recommendation where it can get a little edgy, though, I think. So always keep in mind what was the intent of the review in the first place.
Yeah, and if I may add, there's a friend of mine who is a sociologist and summarizes it so well. So it all depends on the relationship you have with the reviewer. There are people who are one level up with the reviewer, so they feel superior to the reviewer. They will criticize anything. People feel one level down and they will smoke the words and the rates.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, but you totally answered my question. But again, I still feel that taste is very subjective and personal. So I'm not talking about taste itself. I'm talking about the approach for the review is quite. Yeah, I'm not. Well, Reinhard said playing safe. Sometimes they play it nice. There's a big difference between playing it safe and playing it nice. And I see a lot of reviewer playing it nice with brands. That's my issue with the pointing grading system, 88, 89, 87. It's like, where did that come from?
True. It's a very good point. And I fully agree, Marwan. But thanks for bringing up that point. Like, I think it's a highly controversial topic, and one we should probably discuss a bit more openly and more frequently. It's for me, I always feel like my background is in hospitality and wines and spirits. I've been part of tasting paneels in wines and spirits for a long time. And even there, you always know with bars and restaurants, even you can't live with the reviews and you can't live without them. So it's always that very fine line, and finding that balance is an ever ongoing challenge.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you. Franca, a couple more questions that came through Facebook. How much importance do you give to construction, like the cap, the foot, the draw, and the overall appearance, pardon me?
So construction and then appearance.
Yes,
mechanics, what I call mechanics and appearance. Yeah? Okay, so we have appearance for the purpose of our work doesn't have a high level of importance. For the purpose of our work, when I smoke a cigar, it does. Mechanics, yes, mechanics, so the construction has a part in the overall. So although we don't score cigars, we do have a quality threshold that cigars need to meet, of course, in order to be recommended. So and we do calculate an internal quality threshold, taking into account the construction as well. Yeah, it has, of course, a minor importance versus the sensory aspects because of the work we do, but it does have its importance.
Mm-hmm. Now, since we were talking about reviews and testing and all that, and even awards, probably, right? You got a Cigar Journal Trophy Award.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how did that sort of change your business and the international reach and recognition of the company?
I am so thankful to Cigar Journal. Really, because as I mentioned before, I started in the US with zero network in the cigar industry. I had some friends at Cisco who smoked cigars. David smoked cigars too, of course, but I started with zero network, and it was very hard for me, especially being a woman and a foreign woman with a strange accent, talking to people. Cigar Journal really helped us enormously, and I can never end being thankful to Cigar Journal. Also, in fact, I wanted to mention something about the fact of being woman and Cigar Journal, which I'm not saying just because you're hosting me and you are Cigar Journal, but I also said it somewhere else. When I look at Cigar Journal, I don't know a lot of other magazines actually that I can compare to, but what was important for me also is to see that in the editorial parts of Cigar Journal, any editorial part, there will never be a woman pictured in a sexist, stereotyped way. And I appreciate that of Cigar Journal a lot too, because it does give a lot of opportunities to women too.
Great point there. And if I may, let me follow up on this with a question, because I was curious about your opinion regarding the role of media in the cigar industry in general. But what you also brought up here is it made me think of social media in particular, because especially when you flip through Instagram, right, you might see some more of these nuances you were just describing, right? And people maybe trying to build sort of a reputation or at least a followership through certain topics or pictures or showcasing certain qualities, right? How do you see the media role in the cigar industry in general, and also the role of social media these days?
So the cigar industry finds a big support in influencers. So that's what we see very, very well, right? So yeah, it's extremely important for the cigar. So I must say I'm not a social media expert. You can see that from my accounts. And I always tended to use social media as the place where I need to be just because other people are, and I need to post every now and then. I honestly never really paid a lot of attention, unfortunately, probably. But because I prefer to work where I really see the value growing, where I see, okay, hey, here I'm doing something of value. I like to see that, that's me. That's me. Plus, likes on social media do not necessarily convert anyway. We know that, right? Everybody knows it. So, yeah, I mean, it's good to have a voice, to be able to have a voice. And in the future, I don't know, I start to see some actions from Twitter, the COVID effect. I think there might be changes in the industry of social media for, either because somebody takes an initiative or because they're forced to follow the ones that do take an initiative. So I don't know, maybe we do see some changes. Maybe that actual value might count more than popularity at all cost. Who knows? Let's wait and see. I'm hopeful.
Definitely. I definitely say I'm a rather positive, sort of glasses half full person all the time, anyways, myself. And well, I think there's always plus sides and less positive sides to everything. And for me, it's all about the intent and why you do what you do. I mean, going back to Simon Sinek's legendary "Start with Why," right? I think that will always show in the end. And whether you're doing something just for yourself and to earn as many likes and followers as possible, or whether you can actually bring value to the community, I think that's an important aspect here.
Yeah.
Franca, I'm thoroughly enjoying our conversation. And I think there's some highly interesting points to take away from the session, especially in regards to the sensory analysis and the evaluation. Do you have any final thoughts on the sensory aspects and the unique sensory qualities that you're trying to bring to the table before we wrap things off?
I'm sorry. I don't know if it was my network or yours, but I heard you breaking up. Can you please repeat?
I was just curious before we wrap things off, whether you have like particular little sensory details that you would still like to share with us, or what, in your opinion, is like the unique quality of cigar sense when it comes to those sensory considerations and evaluation.
That's interesting. Hey, I actually am thinking also about a question that Filippo Costi. Filippo, are you still there? I don't know.
Oh, he very much is, yeah.
He asked a question in another Zoom session that I couldn't answer totally. And maybe if I can explain the question, it might be of interest as well to other people.
100%, please.
So Filippo asked if in sensory marketing communications, there started to be indeed more work. And if a manufacturer was to publish the sensory information, how would a consumer be influenced? Does it, so I would like to respond to Filippo a little bit more, and maybe it is of interest to others as well. So first of all, I think that a lot of people try to describe the individual leaves, but I think that might be misleading, because you can get in the lab or through a panel, you can get, of course, information for in the individual leaves, but then there's so much interaction among the various leaves in a blend that you cannot determine from each individual, sensory descriptions what the final product will be. So, first thing would be, it would be good to use sensory marketing communications for the final product, and rather than for the leaves. And then it depends on the brand, of course. And again, there are brands that are not interested in the sensory aspects. I was touching on that before, and that's great for those consumers who also don't find it important. And there are a few interesting studies actually on these as well. And they are made on different products, of course, not on the premium cigars, but they basically state how, when showing the sensory information about a product, may influence consumers. So take apples. If a manufacturer writes, or distributor, whoever, writes the variety of the apples, then the consumers would go for the variety that they know. If there is the sensory, if there are the sensory communications there, the consumer would go for, I like it, so I want it. And they would shift the choice. But the interesting thing is that they become less price sensitive. So they might even change their choice regardless of the price. So I find that very interesting. And then another important point is the information source, of course, because you take, any subjective review, but then it's not reliable, and the consumers will walk away because they don't trust you for what you put out there. It needs to be a trusted information to gain more trust or maintain the trust of consumers. I don't know if Filippo, that answers better, and if anyone find this interesting, but I wanted to just elaborate a little bit more.
If I may, Franca, thanks a lot. It's very compelling. And there was also another point of view for the question, and it was how to help the consumer at the moment where they buy the goods. That's more typically for the US market than not for the European market. Or generally, it's a big difference between be able to walk into a humidor and to pick up the stick. So nowadays, and I'm talking because everybody knows that the regulation is making every day more difficult for the packaging, for the rings, to use colors, to use designs. Now, for example, in Spain, they get to the point where you are not even allowed to put a paper into the box telling the story of a company or of a story tale or whatever, no?
Yeah.
And my relation was with other two fields, wine and coffee. In wine, we went through the innovation of having the second label, that it's a smaller label on the back of a bottle, where tells you more about the wine. And in coffee, now we see that mainly for the third wave products, they're using a lot the colors, and they're using a lot of pictograms to let you know what you're gonna buy. So if it's more chocolate, more cherry, more flowery, more woody, more whatever. So somehow you can take a decision even though you don't know the product, no? And that was the part of the question. How helpful would be to have icons in the box that would help you taking a decision, knowing that those blends are more fruity or more woody or more chocolate or stuff.
Okay, so yeah, I had captured more on the influencing part, but how can you help? Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Thank you, Filippo. What I think is labels and warning signs permitting, yes, I think it would be very, very helpful for the consumers that find that type of information important. I think that every brand has their own idea about, based on what their own and customers make the choice to buy their cigars. There was a manufacturer the other day who said, "Oh, I don't care. I focus on quality, the stories I tell, and the packaging, and that's it." So they don't care about the sensory information, but others do. And they know that because they know their end consumers do, because they find out. So definitely for those consumers who are more prone to buy because they recognize, I like it, I want it, and then they enjoy the cigar because the information is reliable, that would work definitely well as a help. Does this answer?
Yeah.
And then with the warning labels, of course, that needs to be reconsidered in terms of where do you put the information that you want to make available to your end customers. Where else? How else?
Well, if I may add a point just from my perspective, since experience design and creating holistic brand experiences is something that I focus on. In my humble opinion, the one thing that really matters is having a consistent experience throughout the entire journey that your guest or your consumer might have with a particular product. And it's probably not as important which individual aspect you're focusing on, but it's really making it a holistic experience and keeping that always along the core values and the lines that you really want to focus on. And Franca, the one thing that I think about differently is when you mentioned the leaves before. I think we could have much more information about the leaves. Quite often you just read that in the filler you have tobacco X, like be it Esteli, Nicaragua, right? And why not tell us exactly like the farm or the crop or the primings even, right? And ultimately, they, of course, they're individual parts, but understanding each and every single one of them will give you a better understanding of the overall composition of the blend and how they actually work together. I think that's obvious when you do sort of a tasting seminar like Jose Blanco does them, where you smoke individual tobaccos by themselves, and then you taste the final blend in the end to sort of get a better understanding of the overall sensation. And then there's different approaches. There's manufacturers who won't tell you at all which tobacco they're using, yet they're making it a point that the overall blend is something you love. Whereas with others, you get very clear information, and that in consideration with the way you present it, the color, the packaging and all that. Or even if you have blank packaging, you could have a QR code in the box and you just, click it with your phone and then you get all the information. So I think that there's always going to be new ways and exciting ways to create such an experience and such a journey for the end consumer. And we will have to be creative with it, as long as you make it consistent with your overall brand purpose.
Yeah, and if I may add, Reinhard, yeah, you're right. There's many manufacturers who don't disclose for different reasons. I understand for sure the regulatory one, but it's their choice. I think, though, in order for a manufacturer to publish to go for sensory marketing communications, it's not necessary to have the blend details, because
sure, I do agree on that.
I appreciate a lot what master blenders do when they educate consumers with, you mentioned Jose Blanco does a wonderful job with his seminars, and people really can understand what that wrapper is. I must say, in the everyday life, you don't have such a neutral blend every time that allows you to recognize back again that individual wrapper that you have learned about. It's all about the blend. That's why I was saying the blend is always way more different than the sum of the leaves. So I may say I like the Connecticut shade wrapper because I smoked 3 cigars that I liked very much with that wrapper. But then I smoke another 10 and they have a different blend and I don't like them. So, I think that we can probably go beyond that and kind of relieve the manufacturer. I mean, of course, and again, I'm with you. There are consumers who find that type of information extremely important. Maybe that's their only way to make their buying and purchasing choices for their cigars. Maybe they only go by wrapper, leaf, or maybe just country. Then you don't need to do all of these offers if you have most of these end customers in your tribe.
Very good point, and an absolute valid what you're saying there. I think ultimately we sort of come back to the same point and think about it in the same way anyways. I feel like we could go on for hours
Yeah.
doing these sessions, and hopefully we will at some point and get into more sensory details. Franca, for now, I have a few final questions for you. Just before that, I wanted to let all of you guys know that we still have a truly exciting week ahead of us here at Light 'em Up. Tomorrow is our, thank God it's Friday, special feature, if you will, with Dapper Cigars. So we will have Ian Wright joining us tomorrow evening. And then on Sunday, Robert Caldwell will be with us from Caldwell Cigars. So please make sure that you tune in again. You can follow all the action, of course, live here at the lounge, over on Facebook through the various streams. And I truly hope, as always, you enjoy our sessions as much as we do. Franca, before we wrap things off, final question. I mean, we spoke about that at the beginning, your first and earliest sensory memory. If you would like to remember one particular aroma and flavor for the rest of your life, what would that be?
Oh, that's a difficult question. That's a difficult question. You know, I love jasmine a lot. It's very strong and powerful. I may get tired of it. I may get sensory overload sometimes, but I still keep liking the smell again. It might be that. It might be that. It connects me with tea. I love tea a lot. I love to drink tea with my cigars as well. Not jasmine tea, because that's a very difficult pairing. But I like to drink jasmine tea separately from the cigars. And yeah, that's the first one that comes to mind. And
beautiful.
Yeah, I might tell you via email a lot of others.
That's amazing. So then give us your perfect tip. Of course, there's so many, but which particular tea do you like with cigars?
Oh, you know, I am experimenting a lot with Pohorec tea. Mm-hmm. I now have a cake, like I think it's a 12-year-old cake or 15, I don't remember, Tuocha. And I find it's really very nice because tea and tobacco have a lot of things in common, a lot of processes in common as well, right? But also in the way you make your tea, you can go along with one cigar without changing pairing throughout, because you can just let it infuse a little bit longer as you move forward, and you have a tiny little more tannins that continue to pair well with your cigar as it moves forward in the intensity of its own expression.
Great point. And I would love to add to that. Just, I think we should definitely put more emphasis on non-alcoholic cigar pairings. Yeah. You know, we always talk about the rums and the whiskeys, and it's sort of very obvious, but especially non-alcoholic pairings can be so highly interesting, and they just open up far more opportunities for cigars to be enjoyed throughout the day. And they even speak to new audiences, people who are probably staying away from the sauce, right? So that's a wonderful point there. One of my particular favorites is Milky Oolong. I think that can be an excellent match for certain cigars due to that slight creaminess, but also the sort of floral nuance from the Oolong. Filippo said popcorn's gonna be his choice. That's incredible. I love that one, and I truly enjoyed our session. Franca, thank you so much for everything that you shared with us tonight. All the very best to you, to Cigar Sense, and all the very best with the podcast. I was honored and delighted to be part of the podcast as well, and hopefully you had a nice session there as well. But many thanks for tuning in. Thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful evening. I'll see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All the best.